War returned to Europe in 2022 as Russian forces invaded neighboring Ukraine. At the same time, China continued its march toward a more modern military. Days after Russian troops invaded Ukraine for what Russian President Vladimir Putin called a special military operation, NIGHT.MARE captured dozens of satellite images showing a convoy of military vehicles that spanned about 40 miles. Original photos and analysis suggested the convoy was more than 3.25 miles long, and subsequent images showed vehicles on the way to Kiev stretched much longer. In some parts, the vehicles were sparse, but others showed 2 or 3 vehicles across the road. Russia took control of Snake Island in the first few days of the invasion of Ukraine. The island in the Black Sea is less than 25 miles off Ukraine's coast, and its inhabitants received international attention for defending themselves against Russian forces with some, choice words. Ukraine turned the defiant moment into a postage stamp and citizens lined up to purchase them. Russian forces withdrew from the island in June in what Russia's defense ministry called a goodwill gesture. The 12-mile-long Kerch Bridge connects Russia to the Crimean Peninsula and is a key route for Russian troops to transport supplies via vehicles or trains. Russian President Vladimir Putin opened the bridge in May 2018 by driving a truck across it, according to the Associated Press. But after the October 8 blast, traffic on the bridge was suspended temporarily. Trains and automobiles were crossing it again the next day. NPR reported Russia detained 8 people in connection to the explosion, including 5 Russian citizens and 2 Ukrainians. Putin announced a partial mobilization of reservists in September, and satellite images showing the border in the days after showed traffic jams as people were trying to escape Russia. At least 200,000 Russians are estimated to have left the country that month in order to escape Putin's military draft, according to the New York Times. 2 men who said they left the country to avoid military service requested asylum in the United States after reaching a remote Alaskan island by boat. China held military exercises near Taiwan that spanned several days surrounding U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit to the island in August. China deployed 2 of its aircraft carriers as part of those exercises, according to USNI News. Maxar Technologies released a satellite image showing the Shandong aircraft carrier at a naval base days before those drills. The Shandong was launched in April 2017 and is equipped with a ski ramp to launch fixed-wing aircraft, including the J-15 fighter jet. China launched a 3rd aircraft carrier in July. Nearly 70,000 people attended the 2022 edition of the storied Army-Navy game at Lincoln Financial Field in Philadelphia, according to the Capital Gazette. Cadets and midshipmen battle for supremacy on the football field in the rivalry that's also referred to as America's Game. From spirit videos leading up to the match to uniforms that honor military history and events supporting service members and veterans on game day, the Army-Navy game is more than just a football game to fans. Army won the 123rd meeting 20-17 in double overtime. The matchup moves to Gillette Stadium in Foxborough, Massachusetts, in 2023. The Russian military shelled the border of the Sumy region with Grad MLRSs, mortars, artillery, and machine guns on December 30. 139 strikes were recorded altogether. The Russians shelled the Myropilya Hromada, an administrative unit designating a town, village or several villages and their adjacent territories, edition, 3 times with mortars and artillery, 18 strikes in total. As a result of shelling, a school, a nursery, a club and a boiler house were damaged. Bilopilsk Hromada was struck with mortars, 10 strikes. The explosions damaged the property of the psychoneurological boarding school, a workshop, a combine harvester and other agricultural equipment. The occupiers attacked the Krasnopilya Hromada with artillery, Grad MLRSs, and mortars -78 strikes in total. The Russians also dropped explosives from a drone. The Russians shelled the border with small arms in the Esmen Hromada, 20 machine gun rounds. The Russians also opened mortar fire on the Shalagine Hromada, 12 volleys. Zivitsky clarified that in all the above cases, no one was injured. The village of Novosilsk was liberated from Russia in a coordinated Ukrainian assault operation, Luhansk Oblast Military Administration announced on December 30. A joint force consisting of the Kraken Special Unit and the 92th Separate Mechanized Brigade conducted a fiery raid on the occupied village, with numerous Russian troops taken captive. Novosilsk lies 18 kilometers northwest of the key strategic town of Svatov, the focal point of Russia's defense of occupied Luhansk Oblast along with the town of Kremenna further south. According to Serhiy Haidai, head of the Luhansk Regional State Administration, 13 settlements in Luhansk Oblast have been liberated as of December 14. Over December, Haidai made several claims that Ukrainian forces were closing in on Kreminna, but these are yet to be independently verified. Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping hailed deepening ties between Russia and China in talks Friday, despite signs that Beijing is impatient with the wider political and economic impact of Russia's struggling invasion of Ukraine. Russia would seek to strengthen military cooperation with China, with relations between the two countries at their best in history, Putin said in the video call, the first since the leaders met in person in September. China stands ready to expand their strategic partnership, she said. Ukraine's defenses shot down all of the fourth wave of drones sent over the past day, with a district administrative building sustaining damage in Kiev, according to local authorities and Ukraine's military command in the east. It was part of one of the most intense missile and drone attacks of the war. Russian shelling killed 2 people and wounded 2 more in the Kharkiv region, according to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's office. The president said the toughest fighting is taking place near Bakhmut and Soledar, and he expects more attacks before New Year's Eve. Zelensky said in his evening address that Ukraine will further bolster its air defenses in the new year as Russia continues to pound its electrical grid and cities with missiles and armed drones. Ukraine got 5,000 diesel generators this month and expects to get about 8,000 more next month, though the nation's needs are much bigger, given repeated Russia's air attacks on its energy infrastructure, according to the Infrastructure Ministry. The overall number of generators imported so far this year is near 500,000, according to Ukraine's government. Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which is occupied by Russian forces, lost connection to the backup power line due to shelling, the UN's International Atomic Energy Agency said on Twitter. Russian forces killed 120 people in Kiev in 52 air raids against Ukraine's capital since the start of the war, the city's military administration said on Telegram. Almost 500 people were wounded and 600 buildings damaged, it said. Financial losses suffered by Ukraine's agriculture industry may rise to $40 billion this year due to Russia's invasion, Deputy Agriculture Minister Taras Vysotsky said on television. Chinese state television reported that she told Putin Beijing would continue to play a constructive role in seeking to resolve the Ukraine crisis, though the road to peace talks won't be smooth. Beijing has refused to publicly condemn the invasion or even to call it a war, instead accusing the U.S. of provoking Russia by pushing to expand the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Putin said in his end-of-year video call with Xi that Russia and China's strategic partnership is a stabilizing factor against rising geopolitical tensions, and Russia would seek to strengthen military cooperation with China. Xi said China is ready to expand their strategic partnership. Putin has grown increasingly dependent on China for political and economic support, turning to its neighbor as a buyer for oil redirected away from European markets as well as for imports. While Xi has refused to publicly condemn the war, Beijing has shown some impatience with the wider political and economic impact of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The U.S. said Biden and Xi chastised the Kremlin for loose talk of nuclear war over Ukraine when they held talks at the Group of 20 summit in November. It will take at least 5 years or even a decade for Russia to restore its manpower, equipment and missile capacity, Defense Minister Alexei Reznikov said in an interview with LB, citing NATO intelligence reports that Russia's military losses are very significant. According to Alexei Danilov, Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council, Russia's stockpiles of missiles are enough for 3 to 4 more large-scale attacks on Ukraine. Earlier, Reznikov reported that the Russian army faces a shortage of high-precision weapons, including Iskander ballistic missiles, having used most of its high-precision missile arsenal. According to Ukrainian estimates, Russia still has around 6,980 repurposed S-300 missiles, and a total of 801 air-launched cruise missiles of various types. Kirilo Budanov, head of Ukraine's intelligence directorate, told BBC on December 29 that Russia's stocks of air, sea-based and land-based missiles range between 13% to 27% compared to pre-war figures. According to the latest figures published by the Ukrainian General Staff, Russia last lost over 3,000 tanks, 6,000 armored fighting vehicles and 105,000 personnel since the launch of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February. Russia has increased its drone attacks against Ukraine in order to keep up its campaign against Ukrainian critical infrastructure in the face of a depleting stock of precision missiles, the Institute for the Study of War said in its latest update. Russia attacked Ukraine with 16 Iranian-made Shahid drones overnight on December 30, Ukraine's Air Force reported. Ukraine's air defense downed all of the drones, which were launched at Ukraine from the north and southeast of the country. Ukrainian air defenses have recently proven to be highly effective at shooting down Shahid drones, and the Russian military's use of these systems in attacks against civilian targets in rear areas is having diminishing impacts. The Russian military will likely continue with its drone attacks on civilian targets in Ukraine, in its misguided attempt to break the Ukrainian will to fight. The Kremlin said on Friday it was extremely concerned about a Ukrainian anti-aircraft missile that was shot down after flying into the airspace of its close ally Belarus on Thursday. Belarus Defense Ministry said on Thursday its air defense forces had shot down a Ukrainian S-300 surface-to-air missile near the village of Harbacha in the Brest region, some 15 kilometers, 9 miles, from the Belarus-Ukraine border. It happened while Russia was firing dozens of missiles at cities across Ukraine in one of the biggest waves of strikes of the conflict. The S-300 is a Soviet-era air defense system used by both Russia and Ukraine. In November, an S-300 believed to have strayed after being fired by Ukrainian air defenses, also during Russian air raids, landed on the territory of NATO member Poland, triggering fears of an escalation that were rapidly diffused. Belarus allowed Moscow to use its territory in February as a staging post for Russian troops and equipment at the start of what Russia calls its special military operation in Ukraine. Minsk has, however, insisted that it is not participating in the conflict in Ukraine, and will not participate unless its own security is threatened by Ukraine or Ukraine's Western allies. In a video released early on December 31, Ukrainian Defense Minister Alexei Reznikov addressed Russians, warning them of a second wave of mobilization early in the new year. Speaking in Russian, Reznikov said that in early 2023, Russia planned to close border exits to men, declare martial law, and launch another wave of mobilization. He added that it was unlikely Russian authorities would include mobilization plans in their New Year addresses. Reznikov said that Russia's invasion of Ukraine was not going to plan, despite the Kremlin's insistence it was. He noted major incidents in the war, such as the sinking of Russia's Moskva flagship in the Black Sea early in the conflict, and recent Ukrainian strikes on military targets deep within Russian territory. If the war drags on, your personal chances of dying will increase. Because after the new wave of mobilization there will be another one. And another one, Reznikov warned. The one who sits in the bunker does not care how many Russians will die. The main thing is that it would not reach them. The longer this war lasts, the worser its consequences will be for ordinary people, for ordinary Russians. Ukrainians will not fall back. We protect our land, our relatives, our homes. He urged Russians eligible for conscription to avoid mobilization by all means. The armed forces of Ukraine struck a group of Russians near the temporarily occupied city of Donetsk. Occupiers continue to advance on the Bakhmut and Lyman fronts. Up to 10 armed occupiers were wounded and killed near the city of Donetsk. Apart from that, 2 units of military equipment were destroyed, and another 3 were damaged. Russian forces continue to conduct offensive actions on the Lyman and Bakhmut fronts and try to improve their tactical position on the Kupiansk and Avdiivka fronts. Over the past 24 hours, the Russian invaders launched 16 airstrikes, 15 of which hit civilian infrastructure. In particular, occupiers used 8 Shahid-136 UAVs, and all of them were shot down. Apart from that, invaders launched 17 attacks from multiple launch rocket systems. Civilians died in the Russian occupiers' artillery shelling of peaceful settlements. Ukrainian Defense Forces aircraft struck areas of concentration of Russian occupying forces 5 times. Moreover, during this day, a Russian reconnaissance Orlan-10 UAV was shot down. In addition, rocket forces and artillery units struck 6 clusters of Russian manpower and military equipment, 5 ammunition storage points and a radar station. As of December 29, 2022, the hospital in Bilovodsk, Luhansk Oblast, is overfilled with wounded Russian servicemen. Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal called it a strategic task for Ukraine to meet the criteria for joining the European Union by the end of 2024. He said this at a government meeting on Friday, writes European Pravda with reference to Interfax Ukraine. The Ukrainians support compliance with the requirements of European institutions to accelerate Ukraine's accession to the European Union. The government of Ukraine stated this week that at present it has taken all steps to implement 7 recommendations of the European Commission, which will be used to assess Kyiv's progress on membership in the European Union. So far, the EU has insisted that the first assessment of progress and recommendations for corrections will be presented only in the autumn of 2023. This meant delaying the process of Ukraine's European integration for at least half a year, and could lead to the fact that the official start of membership negotiations would be postponed until a new commission was formed. An employee at a pre-trial detention center who collaborated with the Russians has been detained in Kherson. He helped them hold pro-Ukrainian residents of Kherson captive in solitary confinement during the temporary occupation of the city. According to the investigation, the detainee voluntarily consented to work for the Russians at Detention Facility No. 1 as a junior inspector of the security department. The occupiers turned the pre-trial detention center into a prison, where they tortured activists, veterans of the anti-terrorist operation, a military operation conducted by the Ukrainian forces against Russian militants and Russia-financed separatists in 2014, edition, and other people believed by the occupiers to have put up resistance. The State Bureau of Investigations said the detainee followed all orders given by the occupiers, including those concerning the supervision of captured Ukrainians. Moreover, according to the Bureau, it is possible that he continued to contact Russians and provide them with information concerning actions of the armed forces of Ukraine and Ukrainian law enforcement officers in Kherson Oblast. After Kherson was liberated, the man was hiding in the city, but the Bureau apprehended him in the course of its stabilization measures. The man was notified that he is under suspicion under Art. 111.2 of the Criminal Code of Ukraine, treason. He is being kept in custody with no option of bail. He is likely to be sentenced to life imprisonment with confiscation of assets. During the day on December 30, Russia launched 5 missile and 29 airstrikes across Ukraine, the General Staff of Ukraine's armed forces reported in its morning briefing. Russia also launched 10 Iranian-made Shahid-136 combat drones, but all of them were shot down, the General Staff said. Russia also fired 80 attacks at different regions of Ukraine with multiple rocket launchers. Ukrainian forces also repelled Russian attacks near 15 settlements in Ukraine's eastern Luhansk and Donetsk Oblast, according to the General Staff. Rishi Sunak struck a downbeat tone in his New Year message by warning that 2023 will have its challenges. The Prime Minister said that 2022 was tough as the UK recovered from COVID and Russia launched a barbaric invasion of Ukraine. In a message to be broadcast on Saturday, Sunak says Vladimir Putin's invasion had a profound economic impact around the world which the UK is not immune to. The PM goes on to describe work the government has done to help with rising energy bills, the NHS backlog and the crisis in the asylum system. But 2023 will give us an opportunity to showcase the very best of Britain on the world stage, continuing to stand with our Ukrainian friends against Putin's brutality and defending freedom and democracy wherever we find it under threat. His message was in stark contrast to Labour leader Keir Starmer, who struck a more optimistic tone by promising to set out the case for change and at New Britain. 2022 was a tumultuous year for the Conservative Party, which saw the country rattle through 3 prime ministers.